Carl Jung revealed something startling. Women who seem untouched by time aren't just blessed by biology, they are in contact with something eternal. Their youthfulness, he said, isn't skin deep. It's the visible trace of an inner dialogue with the soul. Today, I'll take you inside Jung's hidden insight about why certain women radiate agelessness not as a trick of beauty, but as a manifestation of spiritual wholeness. You'll see how what we call looking young is, in Jungian terms, a signal of individuation, the psyche's secret alchemy between shadow and light, between innocence and wisdom. In Jung's view, the woman who looks younger than her years has touched the wellspring of the unconscious, a source he called the self, but she didn't find it through denial or vanity. She found it through descent, through the places where she once broke. Youth returned to her not as an illusion, but as resurrection. There's a story Jung once told of a woman named Elise. At 42, she arrived at his clinic after years of brittle control dieting, pleasing, adapting, always smiling. Her reflection had grown colder, more distant. "I've lost myself," she whispered. Jung replied quietly, "Then perhaps you are ready to meet her." That was the beginning not of rejuvenation creams or affirmations, but of her descent into what Jung called the shadow, the unlived, repressed side of the personality. At first, she resisted. The shadow is always the younger self, the one frozen in fear, rage, desire. The child we abandoned when we learned to survive. But Jung believed that true vitality comes when the woman reclaims this lost twin. In the shadow, he wrote, lies the gold. Elise began to dream of a child with wild hair standing in a field of light, laughing while she stood behind glass, unable to move. It terrified her. And yet, week by week, as she faced the dreams, her face softened. The frozen mask melted. Friends began to say, "You look different." They didn't know it wasn't makeup, it was integration. Modern neuroscience calls this emotional reintegration when suppressed memories and emotions are finally processed. The nervous system leaves chronic stress mode. Cortisol drops. The body literally unfreezes. But Jung saw it first in symbolic form. The body mirrors the soul's condition. When a woman unites with her inner child, her biology follows the spirit. It's not about looking young, it's about becoming whole. The agelessness comes as a side effect, the soul's light breaking through matter. The woman who looks younger than her years has not escaped time. She has made peace with it. She has allowed the cyclical death and rebirth within her, the ego dying to the self again and again. And that rhythm renews her. But there is danger here, Jung warned. To mistake spiritual youth for external charm is to fall back into the persona, the mask we wear to please the world. Many women try to appear forever young, yet their spirit withers under the weight of performance. Jung saw this as the tragedy of the modern woman, radiant outside, hollow within. True youth, he said, is not preservation. It is resurrection. And resurrection demands a descent. Imagine this as your own journey. You descend into the labyrinth where mirrors distort, and every reflection asks, who are you beneath the face? The path is not aesthetic, but alchemical. Each emotion you reclaim, anger, grief, sensuality. Forgotten joy becomes fire in the crucible. The false layers burn away. The ashes fall, and from within, a subtle light begins to rise. You begin to laugh differently. You breathe deeper. You move slower, but with a strange vitality that feels ancient and new. That is the energy Jung called the anima, the living feminine within the psyche, the soul's eternal youth. It's not naive. It's wild wisdom, innocence reborn after experience. Jung wrote, the anima is the bridge to the self, and when a woman walks that bridge, she becomes luminous. Not because she avoids aging, but because she embodies time's secret that everything perishes, and everything is reborn. If you've ever met someone who seemed lit from within, someone who carries both gravity and playfulness, you've witnessed this alchemy. You sense in her something you can't name: serenity, mischief, softness, strength. Her eyes hold memory and mystery at once. That's not cosmetic, that's consciousness. But this transformation asks a price. To reclaim youth of the soul, one must face the places where the heart first grew old, where it learned to distrust wonder. Jung called this the wound of adaptation, when we traded authenticity for approval. The younger-looking woman, spiritually speaking, is the one who returned to that wound, touched it, and refused to harden again. Elise did this in her dreams and daily life. One day she told Jung, "I danced alone last night. No reason, just because." He smiled. "That is your soul," he said, moving again. From that day, something shifted. She no longer measured herself by mirrors, but by aliveness. Her laughter became contagious. Her posture changed. Time seemed to soften around her. And so Jung concluded the woman who reclaims her inner life reclaims her radiance. She doesn't defy nature, she fulfills it. The same process applies to you. The younger self you long to be is not behind you. She is beneath you, buried under roles, expectations, and unspoken grief. When you meet her, not to fix but to embrace, the cycle begins anew. You are not going back in time. You are letting eternity flow through you again. The outer youth fades when the inner child is exiled. But when you bring her home, the years begin to speak differently, not as decay, but as deepening. Somewhere between loss and laughter, between shadow and light, you may realize what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the woman who looks younger is not trying to be anyone else. She has finally come home to herself. And that is why she glows. The mirror doesn't lie, but it only shows what's surfaced. Beneath the surface, the psyche is quietly negotiating. In the crucible of the unconscious, the woman who looks younger isn't merely polishing her outward glow, she's undergone a transformation of the soul. As I take you deeper now, we descend together into the heart of the alchemy, where the true youthfulness is forged not in denial of age, but in the integration of all parts. In the small-town hospital in Zurich, there came a patient named Marta, 38, graceful, intelligent, yet haunted. She told me in Jung's echo, "I feel invisible. My body is creaking. My mind is racing, and something inside keeps whispering, I don't belong here in this present." She carried a hidden shame that she was no longer the bright-eyed girl she once was. The reflection in her bathroom held the proof lines: droopiness, exhaustion. One night, she dreamt of a mirror in a forest. The mirror was cracked. Inside it was her younger face, smiling but only half visible. The other half was shrouded in black vines. She reached toward it. Though she wanted closeness, the vines kept pulling her back. She woke with sorrow. Jung would have listened to this dream not as nonsense, but as message. Every crack in that mirror was a piece of the self rejected, repressed, or hidden. The vines were her fears, her silenced desires, her unexpressed anger, her guilt over wanting more. The smiling face was the youthful aliveness she still carried, but could only touch in dreams, not yet in waking life. Through therapy, she began to bring words to the unspeakable. "I am ashamed I no longer look as lively. I am afraid I'll be discarded." She admitted hatred toward her own body, resentment at how time had shaped her, how she felt she must hide or shrink to be valued. As she named it, she saw something shift. The shame lost its sting. The resentment softened. She began to speak to her body not as enemy, but as partner in a joint story of becoming. Science now confirms what Jung intuited: negative self-perception triggers stress responses, inflammation, even accelerated aging. Entering a compassionate dialogue with the body reduces that internal conflict, a kind of psychophysiological restoration. You breathe differently. Your heart rate eases. Your posture relaxes. Your face, less guarded, less muscularly tense, reflects that ease. But the key is compassion must include the darker parts. So Marta initiated conversations with her fear, her sorrow, her doubt. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she raged. Once she said to the therapist, "If I have to abandon the parts of me that hurt, then youth was never mine to begin with." She was right, because the pieces in shadow weren't obstacles to her rejuvenation, they were the pilgrims bringing her the way. As she claimed them, her skin seemed softer, her bearing changed. People said, "You look younger," but she felt something deeper. She looked more real, less hidden. The youthful one in her mirror ceased to be someone she had lost long ago. She invited her closer in, not as ghost, but as sister. This process is what Jung called individuation, the movement toward wholeness. It is never a linear path. It is never purely positive. It includes the parts we most fear and reject. Those unacknowledged wounds are the first door to aliveness. The woman who looks younger carries an unwritten treaty. She has faced her own mortality, her own inner chaos, and discovered that beneath them lies a source of life. That source is the unconscious, the anima for both women and men, and ultimately the self. The self is symbolic, archetypal, beyond ego. It is not perfect, but whole. It carries a kind of youthful wisdom, the innocence that does not know the destructive naivete of ignoring consequences, but knows the creative innocence of possibility. Jung taught that projections, when we see parts of ourselves in others and react accordingly, distort our relationships. If the younger self remains projected into others, or we idealize youth in others, we become dependent on external youth. But when we retrieve it from within, it becomes a life source. We begin to shine irrespective of how others age or how the external world judges us. The process has stages. First encounter, seeing what's hidden, even if it frightens us. Second dialogue, naming it, feeling it, letting it speak. Third integration, allowing those parts to reshape your life, your choices, your attitude. Fourth embodiment, letting the changes show, not as cosmetic tricks, but as real changes in energy, posture, voice, mood, relationships. Fifth continuation. This is not one and done, but a lifelong return, again and again. The psychic alchemy never ceases. When the alchemy is active, the external body becomes a reflection of internal alignment. Youth is not the absence of age, it is the presence of vitality, resilience, coherence, creativity. The face softens, the eyes open, the gait steadies, the laughter echoes. The soul speaks more freely. Modern life makes this hard. Burnout, attachment wounds, social rejection, demand to perform, silence about inner complexity, fear of anger or discomfort. All these keep parts of us hidden. The pressure to present as polished and perfect often leads to withdrawal from the very depth that could bring true radiance. Instead, what we show is shallow, anxious, controlling. The inner child winks and hides. The aging process feels punishing rather than natural. But there is cost to refusing this journey: rigidity, dis-ease, chronic stress, disconnection, a ceaseless chase after external youth, cosmetic fixes, inner emptiness. The body may temporize youth, but the soul hollows. The woman becomes younger looking in cosmetic terms, but older in spirit. The trade-off is painful and deceptive. Jung's insight is liberating beauty, and youth are not only external, as long as you remember to go inside. The psyche is your deeper cosmetic clinic. You need not erase age, you need to process your history, reclaim your feelings, and let your wholeness remake you. At one point, Marta said, softly, "I think I used to hide from life instead of stepping into it." That simple admission changed the course of her presence. She became harder to overlook, not because she aimed for attention, but because she refused to disappear. She allowed her inner world to illuminate her exterior. And you can, too. To the places you've hidden from your grief, shame, ambition, sensuality, anger, fear, you can say, "I see you. I will listen." The younger self within is waiting, not to be rescued, but to walk with you. The eternal fountain doesn't lie outside, it flows inside. As the journey continues, you may notice subtle shifts. Your energy returns, your voice deepens, your sense of conviction becomes steadier. You may find yourself drawn to life in new ways. The old excitement returns, but with wiser hands. You may care less about others' judgments. You may care more about your own aliveness. Time becomes less of an enemy and more of a depth, like rings in a tree marking not only what you were, but what you became. At the edge of shadow, you glimpse the light. At the edge of age, you touch the eternal not as a theory, but as a reality stirring in your cells. The woman who looks younger doesn't defy age, she befriends time. She turns it into paint for her soul's portrait, rather than eraser to scrub away marks. This is not a promise of flawless skin, but of soul-skinned presence where the trace of life's passage is visible. Yes, but transformed, meaningful, luminous. Now the inner architect speaks. The shadow and the child and the flame and the mirror have done their work. Now emerges the form of the true self in daily life, in real time, in real light. You are no longer just someone who looks younger. You are someone who carries youth differently, not as a mask, but as a presence. You move in time without being consumed by it. You age, yes, yet you age into yourself, rather than toward a facade. As Jung insisted, individuation isn't escape, it's integration. Everything you repressed, denied, feared, or abandoned becomes the raw material for the soul's craftsmanship. The child becomes the sage. The wound becomes the doorway. The body, once estranged, becomes companion. The years no longer steal from you, they accumulate with you. Take for a moment the memory of your earliest sense of aliveness. You may not remember exactly only the pulse, the joy, the unbothered laughter. Let that seed stir now. Let it rise, interwoven with the woman you are today, your grief, your courage, your scars. When that happens, the three ages of you, the one you were, the one you are, the one you will be, begin to dance. The rhythm becomes yours. This glow from within is not for show. It is for truth, for honesty with self, for softening the boundaries between world and inner world, for bridging what you feel and what you act, for making your life not a performance but a living altar to your becoming. There is no end point. You stay alive to the call of the deep, the unconscious, dreams, impulses, calls ignored, the longings you tried to silence. When you listen, something inside you shifts. Energy returns. Presence becomes stronger. The lines on your face gather meaning, not shame. The silver in your hair tells a story of survival, growth, wisdom, and delight. And you may still move through days when you feel old, or tired, or hidden. And that's okay. The descent never fully ends. But each time you walk back from the underworld into the light, you bring back treasure. You bring back unity. You bring back youthful aliveness. To live thus is to embody what I might call eternal becoming. You don't stay fixed, you flow. Gravity pulls, you respond with groundedness. Time passes, you respond with depth. Others may see your face and say, "You look younger," or "You haven't changed." But inside, you realize you have changed. A lot. You have become more yourself, more awake, more honest, more radiant in your being, not your acting. You hold the alchemical secret that the youthful light you admired in others, or wished you had, was never entirely outside you. It was always hidden inside, waiting for your attention, your courage, your tenderness. Jung called that hidden light the self, the great center, the source of renewal, the treasure in the cave. When that's live in you, the face simply reflects the fire. The body moves more flexibly. The voice carries more ease. The eyes hold less strain. Because the inner world has found its voice in the outer. Because your presence isn't divided. Because you no longer chase youth, you live it. Not as a shadow of vanity, but as a flame of being. If you recognize yourself in this journey, comment, "I am ageless in becoming." Your transformation serves not just your healing, but humanity's evolution. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.
You avoid calls and messages, not because you don't care, but because something inside you has gone silent. That silence is not emptiness. It's the sound of an inner world collapsing under the weight of its own noise. You tell yourself you'll respond later when you feel ready, but that readiness never comes. Each unread message becomes heavier, almost sacred in its quiet accusation. You scroll past names you love, yet even love feels like intrusion. It's as if every vibration from your phone knocks against a fragile part of your psyche that's already holding too much. Carl Jung might have called this a symptom of psychic overload, a moment when the conscious mind is flooded by the unconscious, when the persona you wear begins to crack under pressure. The you that moves through the world, smiling, performing, adapting, begins to tremble at the edges. Behind that mask, something stirs, and you feel it not as words but as a pull, a weight in the chest, a quiet wish to disappear. You tell yourself it's exhaustion or burnout or maybe social anxiety. But underneath those names is something older, the soul's rebellion against a life that has become too outer, too fast, too fragmented. You are not broken. You are simply overwhelmed by meaning that has nowhere to go. The calls and messages are not what you're avoiding. You're avoiding the mirror they hold up, the one that asks, "Who are you now? What do these people see when they think of you? Do you still belong to the story they remember?" Every interaction demands a fragment of identity, each text a performance of coherence, and maybe you no longer have the energy to hold all your fragments in place. In Jung's language, your persona, the mask you crafted to meet the world, is beginning to erode. It once protected you, gave you shape, helped you belong, but it's thin now. Behind it, the shadow presses forward all the emotions, fears, and desires you've tucked away in order to appear fine. Avoidance is not apathy, it's containment. The soul trying not to spill. In quiet rooms, you feel that swelling. The thoughts you've silenced come alive in the dark. There's a tremor beneath your calm, something half-remembered, half-dreaded. You're not merely tired of others. You're tired of yourself, the version that performs life on command. The phone lights up again, a simple notification, yet your body tenses as if it's a threat. Because part of you knows that opening it would open you. And right now you're holding the line between survival and unraveling. Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Avoidance, then, isn't laziness. It's the psyche's attempt to buy time to keep consciousness from drowning in its own depths. When you ignore that call, what you're really declining is confrontation with the unseen. But there's something beneath this overload that deserves gentleness. The unconscious isn't punishing you, it's trying to realign you. The silence you fear might actually be the beginning of a listening. Listen not to the world, but to the tremors within. The anger you've swallowed, the grief you've disguised as detachment, the longing that hides beneath "I'm just busy." You may notice dreams returning, strange images, half-formed figures speaking in symbols. These are not random. They're messages from the parts of you left behind. The psyche never wastes its pain. Every avoided message in your inbox is mirrored by an unread message in your unconscious, the one that says, "Come home." It's not a moral failure to turn away. It's an instinctive act of psychic self-preservation. When the outer world demands constant response, the inner world begins to protest. You stop answering because you've stopped hearing yourself. That's what inner overload is: not too much noise, but too little meaning. Not depression, but disconnection from the self. That quiet center. Jung spoke of the deep nucleus that holds all opposites. The self does not rush. It waits. It watches the persona crumble, knowing that collapse is often the first breath of truth. Imagine for a moment your avoidance as a doorway. Behind it, a dim corridor of memories you've ignored. You walk through it hesitantly, the air thick with old voices, unfinished sentences, moments when you said yes while meaning no. These ghosts are not enemies. They are the fragments asking to return. You begin to realize you haven't been avoiding people. You've been avoiding confrontation with the fragments of yourself reflected in them. Each ignored message is a mirror you weren't ready to face. Each delay a quiet prayer for space to remember who you are beneath all the noise. If you could listen deeply enough, you might hear a voice beneath the silence. Not the anxious chatter of thought, but something older, a pulse, steady and patient. It whispers, stop performing. Stop translating yourself into what others need. Let the mask fall, even if it shatters. And in that stillness, something ancient stirs, the self remembering itself. Because when the psyche begins to heal, it often first withdraws. The cocoon looks like death from the outside, but inside something luminous rearranges the fragments. What feels like isolation may be incubation. You are not disappearing. You are reassembling. So when you turn off your phone, when you let messages wait, understand this. You're not rejecting the world. You're reclaiming your center. You're letting the soul breathe after years of pretending it didn't need to. The world will still be there when you return. But you, the one returning, will not be the same. You sit alone, and the quiet grows strange. At first it feels like relief, a pause between demands, but soon the silence begins to speak. Not with words, but with images. Faint flickering scenes rise from the depths of your unconscious, as if your mind is dreaming while awake. A forest at dusk, an empty chair by a window, a version of you walking away from everything you once thought mattered. You sense that these aren't just fantasies, they're fragments of meaning, pieces of the story that the conscious mind can't yet translate. Jung believed that what we call the unconscious is not merely a storage of forgotten things, but a living intelligence, a companion made of symbols and instincts older than language itself. So when you avoid the world, perhaps it's because this other intelligence has begun to speak louder than your notifications. It calls you into dream space, into that deep interior wilderness where the soul sheds its borrowed shapes. You didn't choose to enter, you were summoned. The same way seeds are summoned by the dark. The world has told you to stay connected, to always reply, to always be seen. But the psyche has its own rhythm, ancient lunar tidal. It knows that too much light burns. It demands shadow. It demands retreat. You may feel guilt for stepping away. That's the persona, the social self trembling as it loses control. The persona whispers, you'll be forgotten. It feeds on visibility, on performance, on constant exchange. But beneath it, the true self whispers something quieter. Let them forget you. Find what remembers you. In Jung's language, this is the beginning of individuation, the slow, painful unmasking of the soul from its roles. The process is rarely graceful. It begins with disorientation. The things that once anchored you, relationships, ambitions, routines, start to feel unreal, like stage props. You look at your own life and sense the hollowness behind its momentum. You wonder, was I ever really there? That question is not despair. It's awakening. Because to become whole, you must first see how partial you've been. Avoiding calls and messages isn't a problem to fix. It's a symptom of deeper alignment. The psyche is trying to draw energy away from performance and back toward essence. It's redirecting your attention inward, where the neglected archetypes, the lover, the hermit, the child, the warrior, all wait for their turn to speak. Sometimes the hermit comes first. He brings solitude and the ache of distance. He teaches that being alone is not the same as being abandoned. He reminds you that the world within you is vast and that silence is its first language. Then the shadow appears, the one you've spent years avoiding. It holds your anger, jealousy, pride, and shame. All the qualities you've exiled in order to seem good, kind, balanced. The shadow is not evil. It's raw life energy that's been caged. When it begins to leak, it often looks like burnout, irritation, or apathy. You avoid people because the mask can no longer contain the energy pressing against it. But here's the paradox. Jung understood so deeply what you reject in yourself becomes what pursues you. Each message you ignore becomes charged with that unspoken energy. The guilt you feel is not moral, it's magnetic. The unconscious is trying to integrate what you've disowned. You are being asked to meet your own darkness. Not to conquer it, but to listen. In dreams, you may see faces you don't recognize, voices calling your name. You may feel haunted by past versions of yourself, the one who was braver, the one who was freer, the one who still believed. They're not ghosts, they're invitations. Imagine for a moment turning toward that inner figure, the one standing in the forest of your psyche waiting. You meet their gaze. You see your own eyes staring back. The boundary between you and them dissolves. You realize this figure has been living in the silence all along, waiting for your absence from the world, so it could finally speak. That's the hidden grace of overload. When the outer life collapses, the inner life begins to bloom. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." You feel that pain now, the ache of stillness, the discomfort of introspection, but within it lies the seed of freedom. The same nervous system that trembles at the sound of a message can also tremble with awe. The same sensitivity that feels like weakness becomes your doorway to depth. It's tempting to escape this phase, to distract yourself with noise, endless scrolling, numbing rituals, pretending to be back to normal. But each avoidance only delays the inevitable. The soul's call grows louder with every unanswered message. Eventually, even silence becomes unbearable, unless it's met consciously. So you begin to face it, slowly, without judgment. You notice the tension between who you are and who you perform to be. You begin to realize that the exhaustion you call overload is not caused by the world's demands, but by your own dividedness, the distance between your surface and your depth. And maybe for the first time you allow that division to dissolve. You breathe into it. You say, "Yes, I am tired." You stop pretending to be more whole than you are. In that honesty, something inside you exhales. The flood of notifications fades into background noise. The guilt softens, and beneath the noise of thought there's a hum, a deep pulse rising from somewhere below the surface. You feel it not in your head but in your bones. The psyche beginning to align. This is not healing as you imagined it, no epiphany, no grand vision, just a slow reunion with your own aliveness. The messages can wait. The world can wait. What cannot wait is the soul's demand for truth. As you sit there in the dim light of your own awareness, you begin to sense a strange tenderness toward yourself. The same self you once judged for being distant now feels sacred, like a being in metamorphosis. You are not hiding. You are transforming. And though you don't yet know who you'll become, you can feel that the one emerging is more real than any version you've performed before. There's a strange stillness that follows transformation. You feel it like the quiet after a storm, not peace exactly, but a vastness. The air is different now. The silence doesn't press on you anymore. It opens around you like a space you can finally breathe in. Something inside has unclenched. You're no longer hiding from the world yet. You no longer chase it either. The noise that once demanded your attention, the buzzing, the alerts, the endless need to respond no longer feels like authority. It's just sound. The true signal comes from deeper down, from a quiet intuition that speaks without words. Jung called this the voice of the self, not the ego's chatter, but the deeper intelligence of the psyche trying to bring you into wholeness. It doesn't speak in commands. It speaks in symbols, in sudden clarity, in a strange sense that everything is connected by something you can feel but not name. You begin to realize that every call you ignored, every message you couldn't face, was a lesson in boundaries written by your unconscious. The psyche was teaching you to discriminate between noise and necessity, between the outer life that drains and the inner life that renews. The withdrawal was never rejection, it was purification. And then quietly something shifts. You start to sense the world again, not as a burden, but as texture. The sound of footsteps in a hallway, the warmth of a friend's voice you've missed. You no longer feel invaded by their presence, because now you know how to return without losing yourself. You move through this new landscape with tenderness, aware that re-entry into life requires care. You're like a diver surfacing slowly after being too deep, your body remembering how to breathe the air of ordinary days. The people who once felt distant now seem softer, almost luminous, because you see their masks too. You see their own shadows, their exhaustion, their need to perform, and suddenly you understand them without judgment. You see that everyone is just trying to carry the weight of their inner worlds while pretending it's easy. The empathy that arises from your silence is not sentimental, it's sacred. It's born of recognition. You have met your darkness, and in doing so, you can now see the light in others, even when they can't. You might notice that you still retreat sometimes, and that's okay. Solitude is no longer avoidance, it's dialogue. Each withdrawal now feels like returning to a well. You dip into the silence, draw up meaning, and bring it back into the world like clear water. This is the rhythm of individuation, expansion, and return, descent and ascent. The psyche breathes through you, shaping you, dissolving what's false, revealing what's true. It's not linear. You'll fall again. You'll avoid again. But now you understand that each retreat is not regression, it's recalibration. In one of his letters, Jung wrote that the goal is not to become perfect, but whole. Wholeness includes your confusion, your fear, your longing, your mistakes. It's not about answering every call. It's about knowing which ones come from truth. Sometimes the call is literal, a voice reaching out, a connection to repair. Other times it's metaphoric, a stirring in the heart, a creative impulse, a forgotten dream resurfacing after years of neglect. To live consciously is to discern which calls to answer and which to let pass. That discernment is born from silence. You begin to notice that when you pick up your phone now, it doesn't feel heavy. The device is the same, but you are not. You've reclaimed the authority to decide when and how to connect. You've learned that saying nothing can sometimes be the most honest form of communication, a way of saying, "I'm still listening inside." The world will keep demanding quick replies. It will call your stillness withdrawal and your boundaries distance. But you will know better. You've seen the landscape of the soul, the dark forests, the quiet lakes, the fires that burn unseen beneath your composure. You've learned that every act of turning inward eventually brings you closer to life, not further from it. You've stopped chasing meaning outside yourself. Now you let meaning find you. And perhaps when the next message comes, you won't respond out of obligation, but out of genuine presence. You'll answer not to be polite, but to be real. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Because when you speak from wholeness, even silence becomes communication. You start to see how this whole pattern avoidance collapse renewal was the psyche's hidden choreography. You thought you were breaking down, but in truth you were breaking open. The overload was initiation. The silence was ceremony. The isolation was alchemy. You were not escaping life, you were entering it through the only doorway that ever truly exists, the one within. In the great mirror of the unconscious, you saw that every shadow held light. Every unanswered call was the self calling you home. Every unread message was an invitation to meet yourself before meeting anyone else. And now, as you stand on the threshold of this new clarity, you see the pattern stretching beyond you, a web of inner awakenings woven across the world. So many souls like you, sitting in rooms lit only by phone screens, wondering why they can't bear to answer. Each one silently descending into the same dark interior sea, searching for what was never lost, the voice that whispers beneath the noise. You are not too much. You are simply full. So when you find yourself retreating again, remember this: it's not a failure to rest. It's not weakness to be still. The psyche has its own seasons. Winter teaches what summer forgets. You avoid calls and messages because something wiser within you is choosing silence as medicine. Let it. Trust it. For when the soul finishes its recalibration, you will return quieter, yes, but also clearer. Your words will carry weight again. Your presence will speak louder than your performance ever did. And one day you'll hear that familiar sound, the phone vibrating, the world calling, and you'll smile not out of duty but out of love. You'll answer not because you must, but because the voice on the other end will no longer pull you away from yourself. It will meet you there, because now you know connection without self-awareness is noise, but connection after silence is symphony. Every shadow reveals its hidden light. Every wound whispers how it wants to heal. Every descent into confusion carries an ascent toward clarity. And somewhere between silence and speech, between solitude and return, you begin to realize the call you've been avoiding has always been your own.
A few days ago, I received a phone call that left me in silence. A woman's voice, trembling with grief, asked a question that lingers still. "Dr. Jung, my husband has died. I wish to cremate him, because we have no money for a burial. But my mother says if I do that, he will not rise again on the day of judgment. Is it true?" As I listened to her anguish, I realized she was not alone. All over the world, millions of believers are asking the same thing quietly, fearfully. For centuries, Graves marked the resting place of faith. Now there are furnaces, and urns where once were tombs. The fire spreads faster than the gospel that once forbade it. In countries like the United States, most people now choose flame over soil. And so arises the forbidden question. If God promised to raise the dead, what happens when the body no longer exists? Can he summon flesh from dust or from ash? Can the Almighty rebuild what fire consumed? I have spent my life studying mysteries that religion hesitates to face. I have spoken with theologians, scientists, and mystics. I have read the dust of forgotten libraries and stood in silence beside funeral pyres from Delhi to Zurich. What I found reshaped my understanding of death and perhaps of life itself. For the answer does not lie in the regulations of churches or the manuals of mortuaries. It lies deeper, written into the ancient psyche, the book of symbols older than Scripture, older than language, the human soul itself. Cremation. The act of fire returning flesh to the elements. Few have witnessed it closely. I have. The body once warm, breathing, kissed, and wept over is placed into a chamber built for transformation. Not a mere oven, but an alchemical furnace, reaching 1,000 degrees. The air itself trembles. Within moments, the body begins its slow vanishing. The heart that once beat with love becomes vapor. The lungs that drew the breath of spring turn to smoke. In a few hours, what remains are brittle fragments of bone, crushed to fine gray dust, the last physical trace of a lifetime. Ashes that slip between the fingers like dry sand. Some keep them in polished urns. Others scatter them to the sea or the mountains. It is clean, efficient, modern, and for many, deeply unsettling. Because for millennia, humanity entrusted its dead to the earth. Now we give them to fire, the most ancient, yet most ambivalent of symbols. When I was a child, cremation was unthinkable in Christian lands. To burn the dead was pagan. The faithful were buried, always, because burial meant hope, the seed sleeping in the soil, waiting for resurrection. But today, in most Christian nations, the pyre replaces the grave. The reasons are many-cost: convenience, ecology, distance. A coffin costs thousands. A burial plot even more. Cities run out of space. The planet itself protests our excess. Cremation feels practical, mercifully simple in a complicated world. And yet, beneath these modern motives, there stirs something older, a shift in our collective imagination about the body, the soul, and time. We have begun to see matter as temporary, disposable. We forget that every particle of flesh once carried the breath of the divine. Fire, in every mythology, is double-edged. It purifies and it punishes. In the Bible, it falls upon Sodom. It descends upon Elijah's altar. It is both the wrath of heaven and the sign of its presence. In the psyche, fire is the symbol of transformation, of ego burned so that the self, the divine center, may be revealed. To fear the flame is to fear change itself. To embrace it blindly is to forget that it consumes as it enlightens. In the Hebrew Scriptures, burial was not merely custom, it was confession. To lay a body in the earth was to affirm that death is not an ending, but a return. Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah not for convenience, but for faith. The body came from dust, and to dust must return not to nothing, but to the womb of creation. Fire, on the other hand, was rarely the friend of the faithful. It was judgment, exile, or desecration. Only in rare and tragic moments were the dead burned, as when Saul's mutilated body was cremated by his soldiers to preserve its dignity. Even then, they buried the bones. Because beneath the fire, humanity still longed for the cool patience of the soil. The body, to the ancients, was not waste, it was temple, the house of breath, shaped by the hands of God and enlivened by His Spirit. To treat it with reverence was not superstition, but love. The ritual of burial was a way of saying this vessel was sacred, and though it breaks, its meaning endures. When the woman on the phone asked if her husband could still rise from ashes, I felt the tremor of the old world meeting the new. The mind seeks certainty, but faith is born in paradox. For whether we choose fire or earth, all return to the same dust. The question is not what remains of the body, but what awakens in the soul when it confronts impermanence. The neuroscientists of our time tell us that memory is not fixed in the brain, but flows like current through countless pathways, a pattern, not a substance. The same may be true of the soul. The form perishes, but the pattern endures. Death, then, is not destruction, but diffusion. And in that diffusion, consciousness like ash upon the wind returns to the unseen field from which it came. We do not fear the grave or the furnace, we fear the mystery. Yet the mystery is the very thing that makes us human. To die is to walk once more into the fire that first forged us, to release what is mortal and trust that something greater will remember our name. When I think of the ancient ritual of burial, I see it not as a mere social tradition, but as an echo of the psyche's deepest rhythm. To bury the dead was to imitate the seed, to hide life in darkness so that it might be reborn. It was a confession of faith in the cycle of transformation, decay giving birth to new creation. The ground was not a prison, it was a womb. But our age has grown impatient with slow resurrections. We have traded the mystery of the soil for the speed of the flame. Cremation is a modern ritual of immediacy, swift, clean, efficient, the same values that rule our machines, our minds, our markets. Yet in this speed, something subtle is lost, the dialogue between time and decay, between the living and the memory of the dead. In the cemetery, grief has a geography. There is a place to go, a stone to touch, a silence to fill. The mourner kneels, and in that gesture, the heart begins to heal. But when ashes scatter, the map disappears. The loss becomes invisible, a vapor carried by the wind. And without ritual, the soul struggles to find form for its sorrow. Still, fire has its wisdom. In Jungian psychology, the flame is the archetype of transformation, the nigredo of alchemy, the blackening that precedes rebirth. What burns is not only the body, but the attachments that bound it to form. The ego resists. The self releases. The furnace becomes a mirror where we see impermanence reflected back at us, fierce, impartial, liberating. Perhaps that is why, even without knowing it, modern people choose cremation. It matches our inner myth. We no longer live close to the earth. We live in the heat of constant change. We are people of the flame digital, restless, luminous, and exhausted. The fire that consumes the body also symbolizes the tempo of our age, fast, brilliant, and brief. Yet beneath this collective transformation lies an older longing, the yearning to reconcile matter and spirit, form and essence. In the Christian mystery, Christ's resurrection was not a metaphor for escape, but for transformation. He did not discard the body, he transfigured it. From flesh to light, from limitation to radiance. That is the archetype that calls to us still not to deny the body, but to redeem it. The woman on the phone feared that her husband's ashes would scatter beyond God's reach, but can the divine, who shapes galaxies from plasma and neurons from dust, forget the form of a single soul? Matter is never lost, it only changes its dance. Even in physics, energy is conserved, transmuted, but never destroyed. So it is with the soul. The early Christians understood this more deeply than we might think. Many of them were burned alive, devoured by beasts, or lost at sea, their bodies erased from history. Yet they believed, with unbroken faith, that not one atom of their being was beyond the Creator's call. When the trumpet sounded, even the ocean would return its dead. So the question is not whether God can raise the cremated. The question is whether we can raise our vision beyond the fear of loss, whether we can trust that the essence of being is not trapped in form. In the language of the psyche, resurrection is the movement toward wholeness, individuation. It is the return of all that has been fragmented, denied, or burned away by life. In that sense, every death, physical or symbolic, is an invitation to this inner resurrection. To cremate the body may simply mirror what the self has always done with the ego, reduce it to ash so that spirit might emerge. Yet even this sacred metaphor asks for humility. Fire, though divine, is not to be handled carelessly. It demands intention, reverence. When the body is given to flame, it should not be as waste, but as offering. Because what we do with our dead reflects what we believe about the living. The neuroscientists tell us that when a person dies, the electrical symphony of the brain fades not instantly, but gradually, a quiet diminuendo. Even in those last moments, tiny sparks of consciousness flicker, as though reluctant to leave the stage. Perhaps this, too, is fire, the final light of a self dissolving into the infinite. Science calls it energy decay. The mystic calls it the soul's return. So, when we gaze upon the ashes of the dead, we are not seeing the end. We are witnessing the elemental translation of a story from flesh to symbol. From symbol to eternity, the body that once walked among us becomes dust, but the meaning it carried enters the air, the earth, the living. Nothing is truly gone. It has merely taken a different shape. And this, perhaps, is the secret the ancients knew but could not say plainly, that the resurrection is not delayed until the end of time. It begins the moment we dare to see through death's disguise. There is a sacred paradox within every flame. What it destroys, it also reveals. When I have watched a body turn to ash, I have also felt a strange clarity awaken, as though the veil between matter and spirit thinned just enough to let eternity breathe through. It is not horror that fills the air, but awe. The psyche senses something primordial, the cycle of dissolution and creation that governs both galaxies and human souls. We have always been creatures of fire. The first spark that lit our ancestors' torches was also the first symbol of consciousness, a light born from darkness, the awakening of awareness itself. To control fire was to take part in the divine act of shaping the world, and deep within us, that memory still burns. So when we cremate our dead, are we defying God or unconsciously enacting the most ancient ritual of renewal? Myth has always spoken in paradoxes. Prometheus stole the flame of heaven, and for his rebellion was punished eternally. Yet without his theft, humanity would have remained in shadow. In the same way, each generation must steal a little divine fire, risk destruction to discover who it truly is. This is what Jung called individuation, the process by which the self becomes whole by descending into its own fire. Every grief, every loss, every death is an alchemical stage in that transformation. We are burned so that we may be clarified. We are reduced so that essence might emerge. In that light, cremation becomes more than a practical choice. It becomes a mirror of our collective psyche. We live in an age of acceleration. We worship light and despise decay. We wish to skip the long, slow process by which nature reclaims her own. We want transcendence without compost, resurrection without tomb. But the psyche does not move at the speed of technology. The unconscious still speaks in seasons, in soil and shadow. When we erase the body too quickly, we risk silencing the dialogue between matter and meaning. The ritual of burial, the slow return to earth, gives time for the heart to understand what the mind refuses, that everything loved must one day change form. Yet we cannot go back. The world has already shifted. We have become nomads again, digital, rootless, transient. Cemeteries once anchored our sense of belonging. Now, mobility has scattered us across continents. In this new landscape, the urn replaces the tomb, the wind replaces the stone, and perhaps that, too, is fitting. The soul is not static. It moves. But the question remains, what of resurrection? If the body is gone, what rises? The early church fathers believed that God's creative word sustains every atom of being. He does not need bones to build a body. His memory is the template of creation itself. What is called forth at the end of time is not a reconstruction, but a revelation, the true form that has slept within us all along. Modern physics gives us a strange confirmation of this faith. Matter is not solid, it is vibration, information, pattern. What we call death is simply a reconfiguration of those patterns. Nothing disappears, it reorganizes. The same energy that once formed the smile of your beloved still hums in the stars, in the wind that crosses your face at dusk. The resurrection, then, is not merely a promise deferred to the last day. It is the eternal law of transformation, what alchemists called solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. Every atom obeys it. Every soul enacts it. Cremation only accelerates what time would do in silence. So when the woman asked me if her husband could still rise from ashes, I told her, the divine does not count particles. He remembers essence. He does not rebuild what was, but awakens what is eternal within it. In that awakening, the ash becomes light again, not by magic, but by truth. Still, I told her, treat the remains with reverence. The body, even when lifeless, carries the memory of touch, of laughter, of pain, the sacred geography of a human story. To scatter it without intention is to forget that holiness once inhabited it. Whether we bury or burn, what matters is not the method but the meaning. Every ritual is a mirror of our inner attitude. If we act from fear, we perpetuate fear. If we act from faith, even the flame becomes sacrament. When we lay the body to rest in soil or in fire, we are also laying down our illusion of permanence. And in doing so, we take the first step toward seeing life as it truly is, a brief shimmer of consciousness in the eternal breath of God. When the woman's tears quieted on the other end of the line, I realized she was not only asking about her husband, she was asking about herself. She was asking whether love survives when form dissolves, whether memory persists when the vessel is gone. It is the question each of us must face when death touches our door. What, in me, is fireproof? I told her that God's remembrance is not limited by matter. The same divine intelligence that called being from chaos requires no intact body to restore it. The resurrection, whether literal or symbolic, is not about reconstruction, it is about transformation. As the seed does not resemble the tree it becomes, so the body that dies does not resemble what it shall be. In Jung's language, the resurrection is the emergence of the self, the divine totality that has been present all along, waiting beneath the ashes of the ego. We fear cremation because we confuse body with identity. But identity, as even neuroscience now whispers, is no fixed object. It is a flow of relationships, memories, patterns of light between neurons. When the brain stops, those lights fade. Yes, but the information, the archetypal form, is not lost. It is written into the larger field of mind from which consciousness arises. In that sense, resurrection is not a future event, but an unveiling of what has never ceased to be. Still, how we treat the body matters. The body is the first temple, the visible expression of invisible life. Paul once wrote, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? To honor the body in burial or in fire is to affirm that life was sacred from its first breath to its final exhale. Disposal without reverence severs the chain between the living and the dead. Reverence restores it." Across centuries, the Church wrestled with this truth. Once it forbade cremation, fearing it symbolized disbelief in the resurrection. Later, it understood that motive matters more than method. To cremate from despair is to yield to meaninglessness. To cremate with faith and gratitude is to return creation to its source. The ritual becomes not a denial, but a prayer in another language of flame-shaped amen. What the scriptures declare as dust to dust, science affirms as entropy, and Jung described as transformation of psychic energy. They are three ways of speaking about the same eternal law: nothing ends. It changes. The body decomposes, but the story persists. And in that story, memory becomes myth, the psyche's way of turning pain into pattern. When I have stood with mourners, watching the urn handed back in quiet ceremony, I have seen their faces carry both disbelief and strange peace. It is as though the fire gives visible form to the invisible process already at work within them, grief consuming itself, love refined into essence. The psyche burns, then clears, and in that clearing, something luminous enters. Our ancestors once returned to the grave to speak to the dead, to leave flowers, to weep among the stones. Those stones anchored the living to memory. Now, as ashes scatter to the air, we must learn new ways to remember, not with monuments, but with mindfulness. The soul does not need a tomb, it needs to be remembered in acts of love, in the continuation of what was good and true. To remember is to resurrect inwardly. The woman asked, "Then my husband is safe," I said. "He is not lost, he has returned to the source that knows no forgetting." Her sobbing softened into silence, the kind that signals something inside has shifted. Hope had replaced fear. She whispered, "Then God will not forget him." And I replied, "God forgets nothing that was born of love." That is the truth I have found after a lifetime among symbols and souls, that the fire of death does not consume meaning, it reveals it. The dust is not an ending, but a beginning, a threshold to the vast field where form and spirit reunite. Every life is a spark in that field, every death a returning flame. So, should a Christian choose cremation? Scripture does not forbid it. Faith does not fear it. But one must choose with reverence, aware that even the smallest act around death speaks of what we believe about life. If the choice honors love, if it consoles the living, if it is made not from convenience but from awareness, then even fire becomes holy ground. Because in the end, the mystery of resurrection is not about how the body rises, but who remembers. And the one who remembers is eternal. Dust or ash, bone or light, all return to him. For he once said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me shall live, even though he dies." The fire will pass. The love remains. And from that love, all things shall rise again.